Putin just had his worst night in 2 years, and it happened deep inside his own country, in a city he thought was safe. This is the story of how Ukraine turned the tables, how drones flew hundreds of miles past the front line, past Moscow's defenses, and hit two massive warehouses that were quietly feeding Russia's war machine. 9 people are dead, more than 80 are hurt, and the fires are still burning as this war enters one of its bloodiest stretches since it began. Stick with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why this strike matters so much, why Putin can't just brush it off, and why both sides just had their deadliest nights of the entire year. Let's start with what happened. It was the early hours of Saturday, July 18, 2026. Most of Russia was asleep. Then, without warning, Ukrainian drones came screaming out of the dark sky, hundreds of miles from the war zone. 2 targets got hit hard. The first was in a town called Kotovsk in the Tambov region. That's almost 700 kilometers from the front line. Picture driving from New York almost all the way to Chicago. And that's roughly how far these drones had to travel just to reach their target. The second target was in Elektrostal, a city just 50 kilometers east of Moscow, not near Moscow, practically a suburb of it. Both places had one thing in common: giant warehouses belonging to Wildberries, which is basically Russia's version of Amazon. Huge, sprawling logistics centers packed with goods and, according to Ukraine, something much more dangerous. Ukraine's president, Volodymyr Zelensky, came out and said these weren't just shopping warehouses. He said the facilities were being used to bring in banned parts, the kind used to build attack drones and guide their navigation systems. In other words, Ukraine wasn't just hitting a warehouse. Ukraine says it was hitting a hidden piece of Russia's drone-making supply chain. Now here's where it gets grim. At the Kotovsk warehouse, 7 workers on the night shift were killed instantly. 25 more were hurt, 7 of them critically. These were ordinary people doing overnight shifts, unaware their workplace had become a military target in a war most of them probably didn't think about while stacking boxes. In Elektrostal, the numbers were just as heavy. Dozens wounded. 1 person later died in the hospital. Debris from the drones didn't just hit the warehouse either. It landed near a kindergarten building, sparking a fire. Thankfully, no children were reported hurt there, but just think about how close that came to being a very different kind of headline. And it didn't stop with the warehouses. A separate drone slammed into an oil depot in a nearby city called Noginsk. That explosion was serious enough that officials had to evacuate a maternity hospital and a residential building nearby. Imagine being a new mom, hours after giving birth, being rushed out of your hospital room because a war that supposedly has nothing to do with your city just landed on your doorstep. Russian officials say around 28 drones were shot down that night, and they claim the ones that got through were specifically built to cause maximum damage to people, not just buildings. Whether or not that's true, one thing is clear. This was not a small pinprick attack. Analysts are calling it the deadliest Ukrainian strike inside Russian territory in 2 full years. 2 years. Since 2024, Russia has not felt a night like this on its own soil. So why now? Why this sudden, deep, painful hit right when it did? To understand that, you have to zoom out and look at what's been happening on the other side of this war, because Ukraine didn't throw this punch out of nowhere. Russia has been landing brutal blows on Ukrainian cities for weeks. Let's go back a few days before this strike. On July 2nd, Russia launched what became known as its deadliest attack on Kyiv all year. Missiles and drones tore through residential buildings. Rescue workers spent hours digging through crushed apartment blocks looking for survivors. Just 1 day later, 5 more people were killed in a fresh wave of strikes, including a toddler who died when a drone slammed into an apartment building in the Sumy region. A toddler killed in his own home, nowhere near any battlefield. Then came July 6th and 7th. Russia hit Kyiv again, this time with over 70 missiles, including an unusually high number of ballistic missiles, the kind that are much harder to shoot out of the sky. At least 22 people were killed in that wave alone, and just days later, that number climbed to 26. Entire apartment towers were ripped open. Emergency crews worked through rubble looking for anyone still breathing. And this all came right before a major NATO summit, where the US president was set to sit down with Ukraine's president to talk about ending the war. Instead of quieting down before the talks, Russia's attacks got louder. Zoom out even further, and the picture gets even darker. According to the United Nations, this past summer saw the highest number of civilian casualties in Ukraine since the very first year of the full-scale invasion, back in 2022. Over 1,600 civilians were killed or injured in a single month. That's the second worst month of the entire war, beaten only by the opening chaos of the invasion itself. So, when you understand all of that, this Ukrainian strike deep into Russia starts to make a lot more sense. For months, Ukrainian cities have been getting hammered almost nightly. Families have been sleeping in subway stations. Children have been dying in their own bedrooms. And Ukraine's message with this strike seems to be simple. If our cities aren't safe, yours won't feel safe either. That's what makes this moment different from a normal battlefield exchange. This wasn't a strike near the trenches. It was a strike that reached into the heart of Russia, hundreds of miles from any front line, hitting supply chains that feed the very drones Russia has been using to kill Ukrainian civilians. Let's talk about why this particular strike is such a big deal for Putin specifically, not just for Russia as a country. For years, Putin has tried to sell a story to his own people. The war is far away. It's happening somewhere else, to someone else. Life in Moscow, in the wealthy suburbs, in cities like Elektrostal, goes on almost like normal. That story just got a lot harder to tell. When drone strikes reach 50 kilometers from the capital, when a maternity hospital has to be evacuated, when night shift warehouse workers are killed while stacking online shopping orders, the war stops being a distant headline. It becomes something people can see the smoke from. There's also a strategic wound here, not just a symbolic one. If Ukraine really did target facilities tied to drone production and navigation parts, that's not just a message. That's an attempt to slow down the very weapons Russia has been using against Ukrainian cities. Every damaged warehouse, every burned batch of components, is a small dent in Russia's ability to keep launching those nightly wars against Kyiv, Sumy, and other Ukrainian cities. And there's the timing. This didn't happen in a random week. It happened right around a high-stakes NATO summit, with talk of peace negotiations in the air. Striking this hard, this deep, right at that moment, sends a message to everyone at that summit table. Ukraine still has the ability to reach far into Russian territory. This isn't a war Russia can simply wait out from a position of comfort. Now, it's worth stepping back and being honest about where this leaves both sides, because neither one is winning cleanly here. Russia has been launching massive drone and missile waves at Ukrainian cities, killing dozens of civilians in some of the worst nights of the year. Ukraine has just landed its own deepest, deadliest strike inside Russia in 2 years. Both governments are inflicting real pain on ordinary people who didn't choose this war. Warehouse workers in Russia, toddlers in Sumy, families hiding in Kyiv basements, none of them asked for any of this. What we're watching right now is a war where both sides seem to be trying to prove the other side's homeland isn't safe either. Russia hits Kyiv to break Ukrainian resolve. Ukraine hits deep into Russia to break the illusion that the war is far away for ordinary Russians. It's a brutal, grinding message being sent back and forth, and civilians on both sides are the ones paying for it. So, where does this leave things going forward? With peace talks happening around the same time as some of the worst violence of the entire war, it's hard to say if this strike pushes both sides toward the table or pushes them further apart. A wounded Putin might dig in harder, determined not to look weak. Or a wounded Putin might finally feel real pressure to negotiate, now that the war has physically reached places that always felt untouchable. What is clear is this. The idea that this war stays contained to a front line, somewhere far from major cities, is gone. Ukraine has shown it can reach warehouses 50 kilometers from Moscow. Russia has shown it can flatten apartment blocks in the heart of Kiev. Both sides have crossed lines that make this conflict feel less like a distant border dispute and more like something that touches entire nations. From the capital cities all the way down to a small warehouse town most people had never heard of before this weekend. Putin built an image of control, of a war happening somewhere else, to someone else. This past weekend, that image took a direct hit, and so did dozens of real people who never expected the war to knock on their own door. If this video helped you understand what's actually happening in this war beyond the headlines, hit like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what you think happens next. Does this push both sides toward peace, or does it push them further into this bloody stalemate? I'll see you in the next one.